As you already know, my name is Emerson, and I'm going to be introducing Pastor Daron Pratt. I've got about 2 questions for him so we can get to know him a bit better.
One, two. 1, 2. Yes, thank you. Look at that. Power of technology. Our young people know what they're doing. Well done. Okay.
So our first question is, who was your greatest mentor when you were growing up in the church?
Oh, that's a hard one. I had a lot of people. I would say the greatest one would be my Uncle Lionel in Mildura Church. He was a deacon and he built Mildura Church, and he allowed me to follow him around and do deacon duties. He never told me to get lost, and I helped him with everything. So I'd say probably my Uncle Lionel.
And the second question is, what was one of your favourite moments while you were in the church as a kid?
My favourite moments? Possibly back in my Bendigo days, when a leader there named Mr. Turner used to take, I was only a pre-J&B young, but he allowed me to follow along and go out on Pathfinder activities. Pathfinders and adventures was probably my favourite moments, and Ray, who was in Bendigo, was that man who just loved kids.
Do you have any other memories?
I think being loved and included in everything. The best Sabbaths were bush Sabbaths, when the whole church went bush and we just got out in nature and got lost and found again. So those sorts of high moments were powerful for me.
What was your favourite church?
A lot of churches. As a child or as an adult?
Any.
My favourite church would be Warrnambool Church in Victoria, where I was a pastor before I got ordained, and they just loved their kids no matter what, and all those kids are still in the church and are serving the church today. So that's probably my favourite church to be in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your welcome, and it's great to be here with you this afternoon in South Australia. I love South Australia. It's almost like coming home. Having grown up in Mildura, we used to always come across here to Morford Vale, to the campground, and be involved in camp, and camp next door to Ross and Bronning often, and I got to know them as I was a child. And because my dad was a vacuum cleaner salesman, his head office was in Adelaide, so we would come up here regularly to go to the beach and spend time there while Dad did his days in service. So South Australia has a very pleasant memory for me. My dad was South Australian, growing up in Mount Gambier, that's his hometown, so I've got South Australian blood in my veins, but I don't barrack for Port or Adelaide, so yeah. This afternoon I want to talk about what it means to grow young. This is based on a book written by Cara Powell, Jake Mulder and Brad Griffin, and what they looked at was what keeps churches growing and vibrant and staying young. They examined hundreds of churches and asked the question, for those that were vibrant and young and growing, what were the factors that kept those churches growing and staying young? And then looked at churches that had grown old and died and looked at what was happening to them as well. So this research is based on a lot of different churches, and they came up with 6 things that churches need to do, 6 core commitments that churches need to do to grow young. Now, I was really heartened to hear at the recent Youth Retention Summit at the AUC took on these 6 components as part of their essential strategy. So what you're hearing today is endorsed by our presidents and by the delegates that were there. And Pastor Butch has given a good platform to move forward on this. That theology was excellent. And you'll see as we go through these 6 core commitments, how that theology undergirds what this is all about. So let's go through it fairly quickly and see what this is all about. Churches that grow young are engaging children and families, and they are growing spiritually, emotionally, missionally, and sometimes numerically. There's 10 qualities your church doesn't need to grow young. They don't need a precise size. Size doesn't matter when it comes to a church. You don't need a trendy location or region. You can grow young anywhere, whether it's country or city. No matter where you are, you can't blame your location for growing young. There's not an exact age. Any church can grow young, no matter how old that church is. There's not a popular denomination. It happens cross-denominationally, and so there's no such thing as a popular one when it comes to this. You don't have to have an off-the-chart cool quotient in order to grow young. Both conservative worship churches and more contemporary worship churches are growing young. It's not about the worship. I'll explain a bit later on. You don't need a big modern building to grow young. You don't need a big budget. Does that sound good? Often we're strapped for money. A big budget is not needed if you're going to grow young. You don't need a contemporary worship service. You don't need to water down your teaching style, and you don't need a hyper-entertaining ministry program. Does it now sound doable? I think it does. Let's see what these 6 core commitments do. Number one of the 6 core commitments is to unlock key chain leadership. The story is told in the book of Steve, who was a young guy who had just got his P's. And because Steve was so loved by his church and felt included, the first place he drove on his own in his car was into the churchyard. One of the older members there, a young older lady who was well respected, a matriarch in the church, saw Steve drive in and went across to him and gave him a hug and really said, "Well done on getting your P's. That is so awesome. What it means is that you now are able to help me." "Help you?" said Steve. Yeah. You can help me because we're running small groups here during the week and you're part of that. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to give you a job. See that drink machine over there? I want you to stock that drink machine. Here's the boxes. And here is a key to the drink machine. Oh, and by the way, you want to help yourself to some of the soft drink? Load your car up. We're not worried. Wow, said Steve. This is awesome. And I have a key. And, I guess you're going to need a key to the front door of the church to get in there. So here's a key to the front door of the church. A key to the church? That means I'm important. I now have 2 keys. I have 3 keys, my car key and my house key, and I have these 2 keys. 4 keys on my key ring. And suddenly you began to feel important. Steve said that he felt like he belonged, and he stayed and never left. That's a bit like my story. I grew up in Mildura, and when I was about 7 or 8, we moved across to Daron Church, which is a small little church on the New South Wales side of the Murray, but it's in the Victorian Conference. And so that's where our family went. And by the age of 10, our head elder, Charlie Judd, bus mechanic, I think he's still head elder, although he's getting a lot older. Each year he says, "I don't want this job," but I keep giving it to him because he's such a key chain sort of a person. He's now in his 90s. But he said, "Daron, we need your help. We need people on the roster to do the adult lesson. So is it okay if I put you on that roster?" I said, "Well, I don't know what to do." I said, "I'll show you. Let's say do 1 day of lesson first alongside me, then we'll increase it as we go." So from 10 to 11, I was taught and mentored how to teach the adult lesson as a 10, 11-year-old. And then when I mastered that, he said, "Now we need your help on the preaching plan." What? Yep, we need help in the small church. We're all involved, so you're going to go on the roster and preach. This is from 11, 12, 13-year-old. And I will help you. You will be fine. And so he helped me prepare a sermon and preach my first sermon from the age of 11, 12, 13. People ask, "Why am I a pastor? And why are 3 of your brothers pastors?" It's because people passed on the keys to me and my brothers at a young age. My sister, she's a teacher in one of our schools as well, history, English teacher. Same thing happened to her. She was doing lessons and teaching as well from a very young age. Unlock key chain leadership. Key chain leadership means walking alongside children and handing over access, influence and responsibility in the various ministries of the church. If you want your children to stay, they need to feel like they belong. Need to feel like they belong. How do you make the children feel included in all that you do? That's a question for church boards to ask. If you want your kids to stay, you need to feel like they belong. Another question is, who holds the keys in your church? Both physically and metaphorically. Who holds the keys? Think about that. Do any of your children have access to keys? If not, why not? What's the reason around that? But keys make people feel important. 4 types of key leaders in our church. Keyless leaders, full of passion and potential, but little or no authority. And I'll tell you what, our kids are full of that right from a young age. Key hoarding leaders, always holding the keys and refusing to give access to others. They run the show. They're the matriarch or the patriarch, and the problem is that we're living longer and we're holding onto the keys longer, and our children and our youth don't get a go. Our job is to hold the keys, but mentor and empower and equip. That way our church will grow young. Key learning leaders knows other leaders are important, but also know they won't do as good a job. Key chain leaders, very aware of the keys they hold and prepared to open doors with them for others. A long list of people can point to this leader as the reason they serve in the church today. And Pastor Butcher outlined some of that in his presentation. I'm sure you can think of people in your life who were key chain leaders, and that's the reason why you're here today. How do we empower our younger generation? Action points, what are you personally doing to understand which keys are on your key chain and how these keys might best be used? What are some keys you've already shared or given away to others, especially young people? What we've started doing in our conference just recently is what we call Next Generation Pastor. At camp time, at summer camp time, it's not just a call for baptism and Bible studies, we do a call for those that feel called by God to lead. So this has just been launched in our conference, and we have children right across our conference now preaching from our pulpits. This is Cassie and Hayden. They preached last week at Maxfield Church, and they shared their story, and they were just so excited and bubbling over after they presented that they said, this is where God's called me to do. They invited their friends to come, and they've now joined Bible studies and seminars in the church because they came to see these kids preach. Next Generation Pastor is training up a whole generation of pastors from our conference who are going to be the next big thing in ministry. And I'm excited to be a part of that and helping to set that up and empowering these kids to be involved in preaching. They do a 10-minute sermonette first off. These two shared it. Then the pastor comes in and sums it up. And it's really, really good for these kids to just get a feel for it. And as they grow, they'll begin to preach a full sermon. Why can't the kids preach a sermon in your church? We say that our young people will finish the work. It's time to pass on the keys to the next generation. Number 2 is emphasise with today's young people. That's a second core commitment. If churches outline their vision of what it is to be disciples of Jesus, be part of the movement of God through the local church, and play a significant role in shaping that vision themselves, then perhaps church membership might be something more young people would sign up for. Kids are asking 3 questions today. Who am I? Identity. Where do I fit? Belonging. What difference do I make? Purpose. One of the main ways churches can help young adults is provide people who are mature in their faith and life to walk alongside them. This is commonly called mentoring, coaching, or discipling. Research says we put one extra person, life of our children, who know them by name, who affirm them, who are investing in their lives, that child is 26% more likely to stay in the church. Now, I'll take that as a dad and as a pastor. The same research, if we put 5 mentors into their life, there's people that know them by name, who affirm them and invest in them, those kids are 49% more likely to stay in the church. Now, I'll take that as a dad. Just by putting those mentors in place and stepping into the world of these children. We think that a young person's deepest questions about identity are best answered by God's grace. We're convinced that the need to belong is met by the unconditional love of a church community. And the church is the best intergenerational community left on the planet that can invest in these children. We believe their hunger for purpose is satisfied by being involved in service and mission to the world. I could do a whole talk on service. Service as a family, being involved in service, grows our children's faith exponentially. It's a catalyst by serving as a family. It just grows their spirituality like nothing else can. Ideas for action respond with grace, love, and mission. Stereotype no more. And that's where we're going to hear from Richie a bit later on about stereotypes and what this generation is all about. Learn their names. Just by knowing their names makes them feel like they belong. Do you know the names of all the children that come through your church doors? Ideas for action: huddle regularly with a few young people. What gets in the way of you emphasising or mentoring with the current generation of young people? And the challenge is for you to be the mentor. Number 3 of our 6 is take Jesus' message seriously. Churches that grow young do not water down the gospel and our beliefs, they ramp it up. Our kids want to rise to a challenge. They want to rise to an ideal, something to belong to. So growing young churches take Jesus' message very seriously. Instead of softening the message, it's better to increase the temperature of what it means to follow Jesus. What is radical discipleship all about? Raise the bar, and your kids will want to be a part of it. Jesus wasn't a meek and mild Jesus. He was a radical. And he turned society on its head and changed the world. He mentored a group of young people. Remember that the disciples were all fairly young. They were mere youths that started the church. And Jesus chose to invest in them. As hopeless as they were, sinful as they were, probably the most unprepared bunch when it comes to what was on their resume. But Jesus chose them to be world changers. Your kids can also be world changers. Churches that keep their kids provide a place for them to discuss the hard questions of faith, provide a clear and challenging vision of what it means to follow Jesus, and demonstrates a faith that is counter-cultural. Our kids need to see that. We need to shift our focus. Let's talk about abstract beliefs and more about Jesus. Less tied to formulas and more focused on a redemptive narrative. Less about heaven later and more about life and the kingdom in the here and now. Not saying that other things are important, but these are 3 focus points that these kids gel into when we lift the temperature on those. Romans 12:1 sums that up really well. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place before God as an offering. These are what these kids want to see and rise up to. We need to elevate faith education over an elementary school for morals, tie each part of Scripture to the grand narrative of God. What are you doing to help your congregation take the message of Jesus seriously, not just go through the motions of doing church? Number 4 is fuel a warm community. When asked young people how they would describe their church to a friend, only 12% talked about worship. Only 9% mentioned worship style. Similarly, when we asked what makes your church effective with young people, only a quarter mentioned worship at all. And only 12% mentioned anything about music. That figure dropped to almost 3% when we isolated the top third of churches most effective with young people. So what do they talk about when they describe their church? Overwhelmingly, nearly 1 in 3 share about its warmth. Also telling in evaluating church effectiveness with young people, twice as many pastors as young people name worship music as a vital factor. This reflects a gap between what pastors think young people care about and what they actually care about. These kids want to feel they belong in a warm community that accepts them no matter what and loves them no matter what. How are you accepting and loving and empowering the children in your church? One pastor understands this gap confessed. We can hire and buy cool, but we can't hire or fake warmth. And kids, when they walk into your church, will know within seconds if your church is warm or if your church is cold. What does your church look like? And how warm is your church when it comes to loving our families and their kids? Intergenerational relationships are also incredibly important. Specifically, churches with close intergenerational relationships show higher faith maturity and vibrancy, as well as more examples of the 6 core commitments in action. Mentoring and worship is where intergenerational happens best. And intergenerational worship was seen by Cara Powell and Chap Clark as close as they came to the silver bullet in creating stickiness in keeping our kids. How do we involve our kids in a warm intergenerational community is the question. Action points: create a 5-to-1 ratio of adults and young people. Make all your programs and events intergenerational. Renovate your worship gathering into a family room. Bit like today, what does it mean to be a family, and what does that look like? Generate tiny churches or small groups, and support graduates well. When they leave and go to college and university, make sure you dob them in and love them and write notes to them and keep in touch and connect them with the next congregation. They found that small gap when they leave school and go to university is where we lose most of them. Number 5, prioritise young adults and families everywhere. This is the linchpin when it comes to growing young. In fact, if churches get this one right, it makes a big difference between going over the hill and growing young or staying behind the hill and staying young. It's this one. Prioritise young adults and families everywhere. Highlight it, underline it, memorise it. This is the key to a growing young church. Children know they're important because they are involved in ministry. They are treated as fully fledged members of the church, not just kids to be entertained. A growing young church prioritises young people everywhere, even when it means giving up preferences or shifting what in the past may have been considered non-negotiable. What are your non-negotiables? Are they really non-negotiable? Even when it means relinquishing traditional authority and power in order to embrace the young. Prioritising the young has made a difference between ailing and thriving, not only for young people, but for the whole congregation. The hinge point separating churches that grow old from those that grow young is priority. When churches prioritise young people and their families everywhere, they take a step beyond just empathy and warmth. And here's what David was talking about. Churches that prioritise families allocate resources, energy, and attention to the young both within and without the church. Children make their decision for Jesus before they reach their teenage years. I ask the question, I don't know your church, I don't know your conference very well, but where do most of your evangelistic budget dollars get spent? Where priority is a game changer for churches that want to grow young. If you want to know the priority of your church, look at the budget. Everybody rises when you focus on children and teens. Young people are like salt. When they are included, they make everything taste better. Rethink the numbers. The percentage of children and youth in your church, and David outlined the fact that we're losing a lot of kids from the age of 14 and up. Why is that? The percentage of children and youth in your community. The percentage of budget allocated to children, youth and families. The percentage of your church building resources allocated towards ministry with young people. I challenge you, if we were to turn our budgets on their heads and do it differently, I believe a powerful harvest would be reaped. And in all you do, in all decisions you make at your church board and business meeting, before you make that decision, ask the question, how does this prioritise families and their children everywhere? If you can't answer that question, go back and look at the point again until you are prioritising families, then vote on it. But the linchpin is how is this decision prioritising families and children everywhere? Number 6 is be the best neighbours. Those churches who are good neighbours in their local community are more likely to grow young than those that aren't. The big question to ask here is, if your church closes doors tomorrow, would your local community miss you? If they don't, you're not doing church right. Be the best neighbour. As I said earlier, service grows our kids' faith exponentially. Churches that grow young recognise the careful dance that values both fidelity to Scripture's commands for holiness and knowing and graciously serving their neighbours. The dance affects how they serve, pursue social justice, help teenagers and children find their calling, interact with popular culture, and respond to heated issues. These churches train and infuse their young with an integrated discipleship that enables them to thrive in our complex world. Key points. Know your neighbourhood. Serve and debrief. Immerse your church in justice and service in a radical way. Know your culture. And that's where Richard's going to talk about that in a moment. Survey your church and community and know who the people are that you are serving. We're now going to end our transmission, and it's now time for those at home, if you're watching on the screen, but also those around here to get into your tables and spend a few minutes discussing these questions. There's 6 of them around those 6 core commitments. So pick a couple, have a discussion about how your church can embrace growing young. I'll flick between this screen and the next screen for the next few minutes so you can get those questions.